Hello, I'm Stevie Stimmel, and the following will be a legal podcast review. The podcast that I chose to evaluate for this presentation is called Entertainment Law Update, and that can be found on iTunes or on their website, which I will list at the end of this presentation. But essentially, this podcast focuses on a monthly roundup of entertainment law cases, news, and commentary on such. I'm specifically looking at episode 86, titled Rock Reruns and Registrations. This was published back in June 21st of this year, and the main contributors here are Gordon Firemark and Laura Bennett. This podcast left me with three main takeaways. The first one is in regards to Google's trademark for the brand name. The second one is Sirius and a lawsuit concerning the First Amendment. And the third one considers copyright registration before entering litigation. The general conclusion is that for right now, Google is not in threat of the term genericide, which essentially is a brand dying because of its general use being too generic and losing its trademark protection. There's also another lesson to learn is that by using Google as a common phrase, that alone does not lose the trademark. There are many factors that go into a brand name becoming too generic, and a big indicator is whether or not your competitors are using the brand name to refer to similar goods and services. An example here would be Pilates. I'm sure many people out there have used the term just Google it. If you are doing that, lesson learned, stop. Instead, refer to this as looking something up on Google or searching on Google. Just treat it like a name brand. The second takeaway happens about a minute and 8 seconds into the podcast, but it only briefly covers this lawsuit regarding Sirius, the radio station provider. It was a case regarding an ad that deemed inappropriate to be aired for one of their shows. Sirius decided not to air this ad, and the company filed for a lawsuit. Eventually, this deemed as a freedom of speech because being a private service provider, Sirius can determine what they air or not in consideration to the First Amendment. Essentially, it's important to know that the distributor has rights too, and it is in the details of a contract that determines what these rights are. As in this case, that contract was dead, so the advertising company had no weight in this lawsuit. Shortly after this last takeaway, the podcast reviews whether or not copyright registration should be considered before going into litigation, whether that registration is filed or not. Essentially, what's happening is that many of the circuit districts are split in this decision. It is not a nationwide regulation, and as you can see on the slide here, that certain circuits of courts are on one side of this issue and others are in varying other sides. And as you can see on this slide, at the bottom I have a screenshot of essentially where the circuit courts stand on this issue. And here's the source of the podcast. So feel free to go to that hyperlink there shown on the slide if you're interested in learning more about these cases and more. Moving forward, I see that I could use a lot of these takeaways in my blog and podcast project, mostly because of the trademark and the copyright examples shown here. But also what I thought was extremely interesting was the fact that in broadcast, as long as you have contracts in place, you can work within those bounds. However, if those contracts are old and dead, you can go about your business and make more contracts if needed, or broadcast things that you deem free to speak. Ultimately, with my blog and podcast project, I do have a lot of varying degrees of things that I say that would fall under the First Amendment, but I also would like to include music and images that would also require trademark or copyright licensing to use within my podcast, as well as registering my own brand and creative works. The more information about these topics that I can learn, the more useful they'll be moving forward. I hope to explore more about entertainment law, and for now, this is a good chunk of information that will motivate me to start on the right foot with my podcast. But until then, thanks for watching.